Pretend you're with me." The words left Waverly Strom's mouth before her brain caught up to what she was doing, before she registered that the arm she'd just grabbed belonged to a man she'd seen exactly once before in a photograph tucked inside a crime desk article that her line cook had shown her on a slow Tuesday afternoon. The caption had read only, "Caius Varon, hospitality investor." No further comment. The man himself felt nothing like a photograph. He was built like someone had decided to construct a human being out of intention rather than biology. Broad-shouldered, perfectly still under her fingers, wearing a suit that had no business being in the same room as the rest of them. His dark eyes didn't move from Kent's face. Kent Ellery had cornered Waverly near the bar at the Southern Culinary Excellence Awards Gala 40 minutes after she'd finished plating 200 petit fours in the kitchen downstairs. He always found her when she was already tired. That had been his gift. "I'm just saying, Waverly." Kent tilted his head the way he always did when he wanted to sound reasonable. He was holding a champagne flute and wearing the navy blazer she'd once told him looked good on him, which she now considered one of the more embarrassing mistakes of her 32 years. A woman gets nominated for this award, people expect a certain presentation. You know how this industry is. I'm not trying to be unkind. He absolutely was trying to be unkind. She'd known Kent for 4 years and dated him for 2 of them, which was more than enough time to understand that unkindness was his primary love language. He was a food critic for a national magazine, and a man who believed the words "I'm just being honest" absolved him of every cruelty he committed with them. She had spent 6 months rebuilding the parts of herself he'd worn down, and now he was here at her gala, in her hotel, using that careful, modulated, weaponized concern to tell her, in front of the bar where half the culinary world in New Orleans was currently standing, that her body was the problem, that her size 18 frame was the reason she shouldn't stand at a podium tonight, that the woman who had spent 18 hours over the past 2 days constructing a 5-tiered caramelized fig and honey mousse centerpiece that 3 separate food publications were currently photographing wasn't quite the right image for an award. Her vision went white around the edges. That was when her hand moved on its own. She grabbed the arm of the man at the adjacent high top and said quietly, and with the specific desperation of a person who has run out of other options, "Pretend you're with me, please." Silence dropped over the small cluster of space around them like a curtain. Kent blinked. Then slowly he looked at the man Waverly was holding onto. His expression flickered. Caius Varon looked at Kent with the patient, mildly curious expression of someone watching an insect try to cross a puddle. Then he set down his whiskey glass with a soft, deliberate click. "I don't pretend." His voice was low and unhurried, and it moved through the ambient noise of the gala the way a stone moves through water. Not loudly, just with complete authority over everything around it. He shifted, straightening to his full height, which put him several inches above Kent's 6 feet, and placed one hand at the small of Waverly's back. Steady, warm, unambiguous. "She's with me, and I'd be very careful about how you finish whatever sentence you were building." Kent's jaw worked. He tried on a smile and it didn't quite fit. I know what you were just." Caius let the sentence sit there unfinished, which was somehow worse than completing it. He looked at Kent the way experienced people look at things they've already decided aren't worth their time. "Walk away." Kent walked away. Waverly exhaled for what felt like the first time in 4 minutes. The hand at her back didn't move. She became very aware of it. "Mr. Varon," she started, "I am so sorry. I don't know why I did that. You don't owe me anything, and I—" Waverly Strom. He said her name like he was confirming something, not like he was meeting her for the first time. Executive pastry chef, nominated for Dessert Artist of the Year, the fig and honey mousse with the lace sugar work on the east display table. She blinked. "You know who I am?" "I know the hotel. I'm considering a partnership investment." His dark eyes moved to where Kent had disappeared into the crowd. "Who is he?" "My ex-boyfriend. Food critic." She stopped. She wasn't going to explain the full architecture of what Kent had done to her self-worth over 2 years to a stranger at a gala. It doesn't matter. It matters enough that you grabbed a man you didn't know and asked him to protect you. Heat crawled up the back of her neck. That was a terrible instinct, and I'm going to spend the rest of this evening being mortified about it. Don't. Caius picked up his whiskey glass again. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. Are you available to speak privately, tonight after the ceremony? The suite on the 14th floor was the most expensive room in the Alara Hotel. Waverly had arranged the floral deliveries for it herself when the reservation came through. Standing in it now, with Caius Varron sitting across from her in an armchair, with the easy authority of a man accustomed to every room eventually becoming his, felt surreal in a way she didn't have appropriate language for. He explained what he needed in precise, unembellished terms. A federal task force had been building a case around his distribution networks for 2 years. Nothing they'd found was enough to prosecute. He was careful, and his legitimate holdings were substantial, but the attention was a problem. What the investigators were trying to construct was a portrait of him as a man without ties. Unmoored. Dangerous in the way that unmoored men are dangerous. A public, visible relationship with a well-regarded civilian woman. Someone with no criminal ties, a clear professional record, a face people in this industry recognized, would complicate that portrait considerably. He was not asking her to do anything illegal. He was asking her to attend 4 events over the next 6 weeks on his arm, to be introduced as his partner, to allow a carefully placed mention in a society column or 2. In return, he would ensure that Kent Ellery never attended another event at any venue connected to the Varron Hospitality Group, which turned out to be 17 properties across the Gulf South. He would arrange for her award nomination to receive the kind of quiet institutional weight that made selection panels pay attention, and he would make sure that whatever Kent had been planning to write about the gala's dessert program in his next column reflected the actual quality of the work she'd done. Waverly sat with this for a long moment. "You're asking me to be your cover," she said. "I'm asking you to be seen with me. For federal investigators, among other audiences." She looked at her hands, at the sugar burns on her knuckles from 2 days in the kitchen, at the calluses she'd built from 8 years of doing work she loved, work she was genuinely brilliant at, work that Kent had spent 2 years telling her she was too visibly large to receive credit for. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks. You don't touch me unless there's a reason. Agreed. And I keep running my kitchen. I would expect nothing less. He paused. The fig mousse is the best thing I've eaten at a function like this in 4 years. She looked up at him. He wasn't performing the compliment. He just said it, the way someone states a fact. "Okay," Waverly said. 6 weeks. The first event was a chamber dinner 2 weeks later, hosted at a French Quarter restaurant Caius had acquired the previous year. Waverly appeared in the dress she'd planned to wear, a loose, dark grey wrap that she'd specifically chosen because of how effectively it didn't draw attention. Caius saw it and stopped walking. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" she asked, already defensive. "The way you're standing in it." He nodded toward her hands, which were, in fact, gripping the fabric at her hip. "Like you're trying to disappear." "I'm not trying to. Kent told you to cover up." It wasn't a question. Waverly let go of the fabric. Caius made a call. 45 minutes later, a woman named Bet from a boutique on Magazine Street arrived with a rolling rack and a measuring tape and the specific brisk energy of someone who had done this before. Under Caius's direction, he sat across the room, jacket off, drink in hand, offering one-word opinions. Waverly tried on 8 dresses. He rejected anything that came past mid-calf. He rejected anything in black or grey. When Waverly stepped out in a deep burgundy satin, with a wide, structured neckline that she would never in her life have picked for herself, She made the mistake of immediately wrapping her arms around her own waist. Caius stood up and walked over to her. He didn't say anything. He just gently, firmly took her hands and moved them back to her sides. "Look at the mirror," he said. She did. She was afraid to, and then she did. The dress fit the way good pastry fits a tart shell, like it had been made for exactly that shape and no other. It didn't minimize her hips or flatten her stomach or perform any of the architectural feats she'd spent years trying to achieve with layered fabric. It just held her, exactly as she was, and somehow in doing that, it made her look like someone who did not need to apologize for occupying space. "Kent told me dark colors were slimming," she said, almost to herself. Caius's expression did something brief and controlled. Kent is a mediocre writer who cannot afford the room we're standing in. His opinions about what you should wear died the moment he stopped being relevant to your life. He stepped back. "You look powerful. Let's go." It was not the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, but it was the truest, and it landed somewhere in her chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. The awards ceremony was on a Thursday. Waverly's name was called 20 minutes into the program, and she walked to the podium in a champagne-colored gown and a pair of heels she had practiced in twice and still wasn't entirely comfortable with. And she gave the speech she'd written at 4 in the morning that she'd been told was both funny and moving, and somewhere in the middle of it, she looked out at the audience and found Caius Varron in the 3rd row, watching her with the precise, steady attention of a man who is paying attention because he means to, not because he's supposed to. She got through the rest of the speech. Backstage, with the award in her hands and her heart rate still not entirely under control, Kent appeared. She should have expected it. He always appeared when she'd just done something worth appearing for. "Congratulations," he said, and the way he said it made the word feel like a different word entirely. "Interesting crowd out there. Your new friend seems..." A pause, deliberate. "Men like that don't stay, Waverly. Not with someone like..." Don't finish that sentence. She was still holding her award, and her voice was steadier than she felt. Kent's eyes moved down her dress and back up. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "You have never once spoken for everyone." She met his eyes. "You've only ever spoken for yourself." He opened his mouth. Caius stepped into the corridor. He hadn't rushed. He never seemed to rush. He simply arrived, the way weather arrives, with a change in pressure that everyone in the space immediately felt, and stood next to Waverly, with one hand resting lightly at the curve of her back. Kent Ellery. His voice was conversational, food writer, Southern Palate magazine. He tilted his head slightly. "I've read your column. You've been recycling the same 4 structural critiques for 11 months. It shows." Kent's face went a particular shade of red that Waverly had only ever seen on him when someone punctured the thing he was most proud of. "I don't think you understand who you're talking to," Kent said. "I understand exactly who I'm talking to." Caius's hand at Waverly's back applied the smallest, steadiest pressure, a signal, not a command. "I'm here." "You're the man who spent 2 years telling this woman that she was too much, that she should take up less room, that someone who looks like her doesn't deserve to stand in front of a room and be recognized for what she can do." He paused. "Tonight she won, without your approval. In front of everyone you know." Another pause, quieter. "How does that feel?" Kent said nothing. His jaw was very tight. "There's an exit through the service corridor," Caius said pleasantly. "I'd use it." Kent used it. Waverly looked down at her award. Then she looked up at Caius, who was watching the door Kent had disappeared through with an expression that was not quite satisfaction, more like the resolution of a calculation he'd been running quietly in the background. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. "You thanked me. You shouldn't have to thank someone for being told the truth." The truth being that you are precisely as remarkable as the work you do. He said it without inflation, without performance. Just stated it, the way he stated everything, as if the fact of it were simply beyond question. She almost didn't know what to do with that. The shots came 40 minutes later. The after-party had spilled onto the hotel's second-floor terrace. String lights, a jazz quartet, the specific golden warmth of a New Orleans night in early October. Waverly was standing near the railing with a glass of Prosecco she hadn't drunk when the first sound cracked through the music, and her brain catalogued it, wrongly, as something backfiring on the street below. The second shot was closer. The terrace erupted. Caius moved before she'd fully understood what was happening. His hand closed around her wrist, and he pulled her down behind one of the large stone planters, putting his body between her and the direction the shots had come from. He wasn't panicking. She would think about that later. The absolute frightening absence of panic in him, while the terrace turned to chaos around them. "Stay down," he said. From somewhere to the left, two men she vaguely recognized as part of the wait staff converged on the far end of the terrace with a speed and purposefulness that had nothing to do with hospitality. It was over in 4 minutes. Hotel security sealed the exits. The police arrived. A man was detained near the service stairwell. The jazz quartet had not been harmed. 3 terrace windows were broken. No one had been hit. In the back of the town car afterward, Waverly noticed the tear in the shoulder of Caius's jacket before she noticed the blood. "You're hurt," she said. "Glass fragment, it's minor." "Let me see it." "Waverly, let me see it." She reached across and pushed the jacket off his shoulder. The cut was deep enough to bleed, but not deep enough to require more than pressure and bandaging. She pressed the folded pocket square she'd found in her evening bag against it, without asking, and held it there, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Who were they?" she asked. "Rivals, a faction operating out of Baton Rouge." His jaw was set. "They've been looking for an opportunity to send a message. They found one tonight." She pressed harder. He didn't flinch. "Did they know you'd be here?" Caius was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. "We pulled the external security footage," he said finally. 40 minutes before the shooting, someone made a call from the hotel's secondary entrance. One of the valets identified him from the awards guest list. Waverly went still. "We're still confirming," Caius said. "But the timing corresponds with a call made to a number connected to the Baton Rouge group." "Who was it?" He looked at her. She already knew, from the careful way he was looking at her, what the answer was. "Kent," she said. Not a question. Caius inclined his head once. She absorbed this. The man she had dated for 2 years. The man whose opinions had lived rent-free in her head and reshaped the way she dressed, the way she carried herself, the way she thought about her own reflection. He had told people with guns where Caius would be. He had done it at an event where she was standing 3 feet away. He had not thought about that for even a moment. "He didn't even consider me," she said. Her voice sounded strange. "He was so angry about being embarrassed that he didn't think about whether I was standing right next to you." Caius's hand came up and covered hers where she still held the pocket square against his shoulder. His grip was careful and warm and completely steady. "He thought about himself," Caius said, "which is all he has ever been capable of. Don't let his smallness become something you carry." She looked at his hand over hers, at the specific weight of it. "What happens to him?" she asked. "Nothing that requires you to do anything," Caius said, "or touches you in any way." What happened to Kent Ellery unfolded over the following 11 days, quietly and with surgical completeness. A food writer's reputation lives in his credibility. What Caius's people surfaced, through sources and archived correspondence that were entirely legal to obtain, was a pattern going back 6 years. Reviews lifted from smaller regional writers and reformatted, quotes attributed to chefs who had never given them. A sourcing methodology that, when examined closely. Southern Palate conducted an internal review. Kent was suspended pending investigation on a Wednesday. By Friday he had resigned. By the following week, 3 additional publications had retracted pieces under his byline pending fact-check audits. He did not go to jail. That was not the point. What Caius gave Kent instead was what Kent had spent years giving other people. The experience of being publicly stripped of the credential that made him feel superior to everyone around him. Waverly watched the news cycle from her kitchen during prep shift. She felt relief, not triumph, just the specific quiet of a weight she'd been carrying for longer than she'd realized, finally being set down somewhere she didn't have to go back to. The 6th week arrived. Caius had not mentioned it. Waverly had tracked it herself, aware that she was counting down the end of something she hadn't expected to mind ending. She told herself this was logical. He was a man with a criminal organization and a federal task force, and a life that bore no resemblance to hers. The arrangement had a purpose. The purpose had been served. The investigation had, apparently, shifted its focus toward the Baton Rouge faction following the Terrace incident. She found him in the hotel's upper-level lounge on a Tuesday evening, which had become, she realized, something of a habit for both of them. He was reviewing documents at a corner table. He looked up when she approached. "I think we're done," she said. She sat across from him. "The 6 weeks, the agreement." He set the documents down. He looked at her in the unhurried way. He looked at everything that mattered to him, and the fact that she recognized it as the way he looked at things that mattered to him was, she thought, probably a problem. "The agreement," he repeated. "You don't need the cover anymore. The investigation has redirected. I've kept up my end. You've more than kept up yours." She folded her hands on the table. She was very calm on the outside. On the inside, she was the least calm she had been in 6 weeks. "I just wanted to say it directly, instead of waiting for you to say it." Caius was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and set a small box on the table between them. Waverly looked at it, then at him. "The agreement is over," Caius said. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it she hadn't heard before. Something with edges, with weight. "You're right about that. It accomplished what it needed to accomplish. I am not a man who extends arrangements past their purpose." He paused. "So I'm not extending it." She stared at him. "I'm ending it," he said, "and I'm asking you something different." He opened the box. The ring inside was not showy. An oval diamond in a plain gold setting, the kind of thing chosen by someone who had looked at a great many options and wanted only the one that was correct. It was precisely the ring she would have chosen for herself, which struck her distantly as significant. "I have never once looked at you and seen the things he told you he saw," Caius said. He was not reading from anything. He was just saying it, the way he said everything, with the certainty of a man who has already done the work of knowing what is true. "I have looked at you and seen someone who gets up before dawn to make things beautiful that most people will eat in under 60 seconds and won't think about again, and who does it anyway because the standard matters to her. I have looked at you and seen someone who grabbed a stranger's arm in a moment of absolute panic and said please with more dignity than most people manage in their best moments." He paused. "I have looked at you and seen someone I would like to keep looking at." Waverly's throat was tight. "This is not an arrangement," Caius said. "This is not a cover or a deal or 6 weeks with an expiration date. This is me asking you, Waverly, with no time limit, no mutual benefit, no task force to distract, whether you will let me stay." She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about every morning she had stood in her kitchen before the first light came through the east-facing windows, and reminded herself that what she made mattered even when the people around her spent years suggesting otherwise. She thought about the burgundy dress and the mirror and not looking away. She thought about a man's hand closing over hers in the back of a car, steady and warm, holding her to something solid while the rest of the night fell apart around them. "You're not easy," she said. "No. Your life is complicated. Significantly." I'm going to keep running my kitchen. I would not accept any other arrangement. She reached across the table and took the ring out of the box herself. She looked at it for a moment, at the clean line of it, the quiet certainty of it, and then she looked at him. "Okay," she said, "stay." It was not the most dramatic acceptance in the history of proposals. There was no sobbing, no orchestra swelling from somewhere, no grand gesture. She slid the ring onto her own finger and held her hand out to look at it, and Caius Varron watched her do it with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Open, unhurried, and entirely unguarded. And neither of them said anything else for a while, because there wasn't anything that needed to be said. Waverly Strom had spent the better part of a decade being told, in various ways and by various people, that she was too much, too big, too visible, too present in spaces where she was expected to make herself smaller. She had, in the end, made nothing smaller. She had won the award. She had stood at the podium. She had held pressure on a wound with steady hands and looked at herself in a dress that didn't apologize for her and said okay to a life that made no ordinary sense, and it had all, somehow, been exactly enough, which was the only measurement that had ever actually mattered.